Welcome to the Ambitious Coach Podcast. This is a place where driven, determined coaches learn how to get off the business growth struggle bus and learn how to build a wildly profitable online coaching business. I'm your host, Allison Henderson, corporate dropout to six-figure social media business coach. I'm going to show you how I've been able to create the business of my dreams organically, all through utilizing my social media platforms. So pull up a seat, take some notes, and get ready to see your life and bank account transform. Hello, and welcome back to the Ambitious Coach Podcast. Today, we're diving into a topic that so many coaches and sleep consultants secretly struggle with, which is imposter syndrome. You know that nagging voice that's in your head that says, you aren't qualified, no one will pay you for this, you're a fraud. Yeah, that one. We all have that. And so to help us break it all down, I invited imposter syndrome expert Jill Parekh. She is a business and mindset coach who specializes in helping female founders overcome imposter syndrome and scale to five-figure months. She is the host of a podcast with over 120 downloads and the author of You're Not Special, Overcoming Imposter Syndrome and Stepping into Your Worthiness. In this episode, Jill shares the most common signs of imposter syndrome, especially for coaches in the early stages, and where it all comes from. We also talk about how it can impact your ability to market yourself, show up online, and really sell with confidence. Plus, if you're in a slump and feeling stuck in that downward spiral right now, Jill has some powerful mindset shifts to help you get back on track today. This is one of those conversations that will leave you feeling seen, heard, and understood, and most importantly, ready to take action. So let's get at it. I hope you enjoy this episode. Bye, everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ambitious Coach Podcast. I have one of my favorite coaches of all time. I've worked with her many times in the past, and she's still just one of my favorite people in the world. Welcome, Jill Parekh.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes. Well, I love starting my episodes with just telling everybody a little bit about who you are and what you're all about. And how'd you really get started? Like, share your story.
Okay, so I am a business and mindset coach with a specialization in imposter syndrome, and I help female founders overcome imposter syndrome and grow their income to 5K, 10K, 20K months using the framework of an embodied business. So subconscious reprogramming, nervous system regulation, and strategy. I'm a 4-6 emotional generator in human design. I'm also a hot-headed Aries. I also have ADHD, and a lot of my clients are neurodivergent as well. I have a podcast called the From Imposter to Empowered podcast. It has almost 120,000 downloads. And in 2022, I self-published my first book, which is called You're Not Special. And it's all about overcoming imposter syndrome and stepping into your worthiness. So I started in 2018. I was working full-time for the government, doing my thing, and I was going to become a therapist. But then I think I saw like a YouTube of Tony Robbins, and I was like, oh, what's this coaching thing? And so I decided, instead of becoming a therapist, because there were a lot of rules and regulations around that stuff, I was like, I am going to become a coach. So I worked on my website and I did all the things, and I started actually like showing up on social media, but didn't really take it seriously until about 2019. And something that I just was like noticing as I was coaching on confidence and overcoming like anxiety was I was noticing that a lot of people were struggling with imposter syndrome and this feeling of not being good enough. And I was like, but nobody's talking about it. Like everybody's kind of like talking about it behind closed doors and on coaching calls, but no one's really talking about this feeling that they have around like, well, who is going to want to work with me? So I started realizing that this is a pattern amongst female entrepreneurs specifically. And then I decided to completely like take that on as a niche. And yeah, that's my story of how I got started.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I know so many people can probably relate, and a lot of women, especially when they first start their businesses, and even many years later, because I even know I still have pieces of me that are like, that's imposter syndrome right there.
Totally.
And so, yeah, I know so many people can relate. And so would like to ask you the question, like, so what are just common signs of imposter syndrome that coaches experience, especially in those early stages of business? Like really what causes it and where does it come from?
Yeah. So a couple things that happen are you have these thoughts of like, who am I to do this? And it can kind of feel like, am I credible? Do I have enough expertise, right? Like feeling like they don't have enough qualifications or experience to be an online coach, comparing themselves to a lot of or like established entrepreneurs and thinking that they aren't good enough compared to them, worrying that potential clients will see through them and like realize that they aren't an expert at the thing that they do. They could have a fear of like charging and showing up and selling, right? So feeling guilty about like charging for their services, especially if it's something that like feels very easy to them in terms of like being a coach and helping. It can kind of feel like, okay, but like who am I to actually charge for this kind of work? Believing that they need to like prove themselves with free or low offers because then people are for sure going to pay them, but they're actually devaluing themselves in the process. And like really avoiding being visible. So really avoiding showing up and selling their work because, you know, they're nervous, they're afraid of being judged, they're afraid of being criticized. And just also overcomplicating everything, right? Like thinking things need to be perfect, thinking your offer needs to be perfect, constantly tweaking their offers and the things that they're doing instead of just realizing that the confidence comes from taking the action. And then finally, like it can also create a feeling of like the fear of rejection and failure. So being really afraid to take action and really go towards the things that they're wanting to achieve because they're afraid of being told no. They're afraid that they're going to take it personally. They don't have a lot of like emotional resilience. So all of these things can be a result of imposter syndrome, which is essentially the feeling of not being enough, not being qualified enough or good enough. And the reason why we struggle with these thoughts and feelings is because there could be tons of like reasons why, but from what I've seen, it comes down to like the psychology aspect of it and the social conditioning aspect of it. So firstly, when it comes to the brain for women, especially, we have an overactive error detection. It's called the anterior cingulate cortex. And like this is a part of the brain that is responsible for noticing your mistakes, right? So we are more likely to overanalyze our decisions, second guess our success, and like focus on the things that aren't working versus the things that are. And then we have the socio-emotional part of things as well. And that is like your childhood, how you were raised. And those things can have a huge impact on how you interpret your self-worth.
So are you saying like men don't have this? Like they don't like because we do notice like, you know, women suffer a lot more with that over
right.
dudes, you know?
But it's hilarious because they have higher levels of testosterone and we don't. So like they're more likely to take risks and take action without thinking about like the repercussions. It's so interesting.
That is. Yeah, when you were saying all that, I was like, oh my God, like yeah, because it is true. I mean, obviously we work a lot with women. So like, there's so much overthinking. So I guess a lot of what I'm hearing you say, you know, I'm obviously taking so much into this and I've worked with you. So like, I totally get like where my imposter syndrome comes from and everything like childhood and just overall, like as a woman, I'm like thinking of everything. Like you really have to think of every move that you're making and overthinking all the things. But I know even with my own clients, like it shows up so much with like just selling and marketing yourself. And I know one of your biggest philosophies is like selling every day, showing up every day. So how do you coach somebody through when they're like, I just am so afraid like to post every day? Like, what if I sell every day?
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of the work that I talk about and a lot of the work that I do is that subconscious reprogramming of those like socio emotional experiences, right? But I also do a lot of the nervous system regulation work because pretty much your nervous system sometimes going like can go into fight, flight, or freeze whenever you try and show up and sell, right? So even though it sounds ridiculous, it's like because it's just social media, it is very scary to be seen. It's very scary to be visible, to put yourself out there, to put your offers out there, right? So it is scary to show up and be seen, especially if you have thoughts about yourself too, about not being good enough, and thoughts like, who am I to be doing this? So it can send you into fight, flight, or freeze. So when you feel like an imposter, when you feel not good enough, right? Like when you feel like a fraud, of course you can potentially have these feelings of like panic, overwhelm, confusion. And like these are all things that you will feel if you go into those kinds of responses. So, like, I think it's huge to understand that even though it sounds kind of ridiculous, like showing up can really create that if you have a dysregulated nervous system, right? And that's why it's really important to do the nervous system work alongside the subconscious work, because how we respond physically is really going to change everything about how we show up, the energy in which we show up. And like if you don't feel confident and you're not putting that into how you show up and sell, people can feel that. Like they can feel if you don't feel sure of yourself. So it's really important to be doing that work alongside all of the strategy, right? And I think that's what happens is newer entrepreneurs like come into it and they're like, okay, I need the strategy, I need the content, blah, 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 blah. And then they realize like, like I'm afraid to show up. Like I'm afraid to do this. I'm afraid to do that. And that's when they start realizing like, oh, I actually do need the mindset work and I need all of that kind of work, right?
That was a huge thing that we worked on together. Like you cleaned up
Yep.
all of my thoughts. You really let me just trust in myself.
Yeah.
And I remember when we first started, I had like this like knot, like I would call like a knot in my like my upper, like my solar plexus, like my upper stomach. And even just after a few sessions, like you just helped me really chill out. And like, so that nervous system regulation helped me so much. And obviously with you, you know, having a 6-figure year and just like, yeah, I just killed it. I just, you know, and I think that has a lot to do with it. I had to really clean up all the, oh my God, thank you. But yeah, I knew I had to clean up these thoughts. And that really, yeah, that skyrocketed my revenue and just me showing up and being just so certain in my messaging. And that was a really big thing that like, instead of being afraid to say what I really wanted to say or like second guessing, like, well, is this actually right? What if somebody calls me out and says this is wrong or whatever? And I think so many of the clients that I serve or that are listening to this are afraid someone's going to be like, well, that's actually not true or that's not right or that's not factual. And it's like, but what if it was? What if it to you it was, or that was a part of your methodology, and you can just trust that whatever comes out of your mouth or that whatever you type is actually correct to you, at least. You know,
1,000%. Yes. And I also think that when you struggle with imposter syndrome, showing up and selling can be hard. Also, if you have these like ideas around like selling is bad, right? Like how it's like rude to sell, inappropriate to sell, how nobody is going to like you if you sell too. And like, I think that's a huge thing because people that struggle with imposter syndrome are usually driven by validation and being liked, right? So they usually think people aren't going to like me if I dare to ask them to purchase from me. People aren't going to like me if I should go up and sell. So if you really think about that too, it's like we are biologically conditioned to belong. And when you come into the online space, they're actually telling you, you need to stand out, right? So like, we have to really like undo these thoughts about selling, about belonging, and like undo all of that conditioning as well too.
Yeah, you're right. And because a lot of these women are coming from corporate backgrounds or these 9 to 5, it's like, you got to show up, you got to be professional. Things have to look a certain way,
Yes.
so
Mm-hmm.
polished. Like you can't come to work with your hair in a messy bun and, the leggings or whatever. And like that,
Yeah.
there's such a fear of just, if I'm being myself, will people actually like me? Will people
Yeah.
want to buy from me? And then obviously too, like when you're asking for money, like people have such a fear on that. I'd love for you to maybe touch on that if you don't mind. Like just the
Yeah.
fear of talking about money or asking for money. I know that
Mm.
it's such a big, like my clients right now, I have a group program, and that is a big thing for them of like, but like,
Mhm.
what's going to happen when I just ask for the sale? And I'm like, what if they actually want to work with you?
Right.
Imagine if, like,
Right. Like, I think of it like if you're seeing it as you're taking from someone, of course you're going to have those kinds of thoughts. But I think of it as you're exchanging like services. You're exchanging a service for monetary value. And like back in the day, like back way in the day, how they exchange things was through trading services, right? And like you will still see that in the online space, but then we graduated to currency, right? So I always think of it as like I'm exchanging a very valuable service for somebody to pay me for that service. You're still going to have to show up and do the work, create the course, coach whoever it is, right? So, like, it's almost ridiculous to think about it like you're taking from somebody when you're actually like just exchanging something valuable for money. And I also think that this comes from like that thought of like, are my services valuable? Right?
mm,
Like, are my services actually valuable? And that's the question you need to be asking in terms of like, who is going to want to pay for these kinds of services? It's like, there are services all over the world, like being exchanged constantly. Like, there is somebody doing the exact kind of work that you're doing and charging thousands for it. So it's like, it actually comes down to you and how you see if your services are worth it. Right.
yeah. So, what would be a step that they could take that I know that if somebody has severe imposter syndrome right now and is afraid to
Mm,
ask for money, is afraid to show up, just is feeling so, just maybe in that a downward spiral, even right now, like I
yeah.
want my business to be so successful, but like I feel like such a fraud.
Yeah. 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 So, it's cliche, but I truly believe that like being able to remind yourself of what you've accomplished outside of like having a business is super important. So if you're a newer coach, then you're not going to have a ton of results yet, but you didn't just come into the industry and think like, I'm just going to start blah, 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 blah. You have accomplishments, you have reasons, you have expertise, you have experiences, you have internal characteristics and strengths that are going to make you absolutely perfect for somebody to work with you. And I think it's really huge to like constantly show yourself that because you're not in like a corporate job where you're getting performance reviews. You don't have somebody constantly saying like you're doing a great job. So like you have to tell that to yourself, right? And also some tough love as well. Like if you're in a slump with like feeling not good enough, where are you out of integrity? Like really like asking yourself, where are you not doing the things that you're telling other people to do, that you're telling others to like work on, especially as a coach? Like you have to also look at yourself and like ask yourself, am I doing all of the things that I would tell a client?
Mm,
Right.
yeah. So I don't know, any last words of wisdom? I feel like you covered so much of
Yeah.
why this is happening, ways that they can get out of it. But is there anything else that you feel like if you have imposter syndrome right now, these are your next steps, or this is what you need to be focusing on?
Yeah, like I think that there needs to be some understanding that like when you start a business and you're an entrepreneur, like it is going to be hard, and not just hard like strategically, it's also going to be hard on your confidence, it's going to be hard on your self-worth. And because if you're not taught how to like really be confident in yourself and how to not be in shame about the things you've done or etc., you have to learn how to do that work on your own. And it doesn't mean that oh, like if you struggle with imposter syndrome, that you actually are a fraud and that you actually shouldn't be doing this. It just means that you have to do the work to overcome it, right? And to actually do that work, to see yourself as a big deal, to see yourself as unique, to see yourself as someone who has like a worthy service. And I think that work is just as important as the strategy that you're going to do, especially as a coach. It's like, when you're a coach, you're a leader, right? And like, if you can't lead yourself behind the scenes, there's going to be a lack of integrity and there's going to be a disconnect. And because you're a good person and you want to get results for your clients and you really truly want to help them, like, you have to do the work behind the scenes too. And it doesn't mean that you're a failure. It doesn't mean you're a fraud. Like, we're all doing the work behind the scenes so we can show up confidently, so we can sell our services and charge what we ultimately are wanting to charge.
Yeah. And that was, I think, one of the biggest things that you really helped me with. And so I thank you so much for, and I still like you still pop up on my feed every day. You're always shooting out words of wisdom of, how to just be a better coach, but, how to actually mentally really like work on yourself. Because I think I can teach strategy all day long, but if like people mentally just can't get behind something, then they're going to struggle and and keep wondering, why am I not making any money? And I'm like, we got to look at your thoughts. We got to look about what's really going on internally and mentally. Because sometimes it's not really a business problem. It's a you problem. And people don't want to realize
it's always a you problem. It's always a you problem. Yeah.
And I think that was one of the big things that you taught me. It's like, well, your business is fine, Allison. It's you that is having all these issues. And you're just like, oh yeah, okay. And so sometimes I have to ask, is there actually anything wrong with my business, or is this just my thoughts today suck?
Yeah, totally.
Yep. And so, and you've taught me too. And it's like really being a leader in my life and being a leader in my business and really shifting that piece of me instead of it just being like, woe is me all the time, or I'm the victim here. It's like, no,
oh God,
right? Like, and it's just, that's not number one, a way I never want to live my life of just constantly feeling like that and really taking responsibility for myself inside of my business. And I think a lot of people don't want to do that.
And you have to. And like a lot of the time it really like is annoying to have to take responsibility for yourself and be like, okay, like how did I create this situation, but like it's required.
Mm-hmm.
It honestly is.
Yeah. I always tell people, and you probably heard this, it's like, it may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility. Yeah. Right.
1,000%.
Thank you, Jill. And tell everybody where can
me. I love you so much.
I know. I love you too. I love chatting with you. I know that you have a ton of programs. If you want to just like start spitting out, like how can the people work with you? All the things. Jill's so great. So join one of her programs or work with her one-on-one. She's been such a great person in my life. And once again, I still think of her as just somebody that I can still come to for help and advice. So thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Oh my God. So sweet. So, okay. As I said, you can purchase my book, You're Not Special, on Amazon. And as well, I have my signature program, which is the From Imposter to Empowered program, where we do the subconscious work, the nervous system regulation work, and the strategy. So you can overcome the mindset BS, the imposter syndrome holding you back, sell your offers with confidence and clarity on social media, and make $10K a month with your high ticket offers. And then, of course, you can come over on Threads or Instagram at Your Coach Jill. That's where I am.
Perfect. All right, everyone, please go follow her. And thank you so much, Jill. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Ambitious Coach podcast today. A couple favors before you go. If you found this episode helpful, please take a screenshot and share it on Instagram. Most importantly, don't forget to tag me at Allison Henderson_coach. That's ALLISON Henderson_coach. And lastly, please take a minute to rate this episode and leave a raving review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you tune in to listen. Okay, ambition is great, but it's time to get to work. Take action and commit to being 1% better every day. Once again, thank you for tuning in, and I will see you again next week.